All right, everybody. If you know me from the Yellow app, then you already know what time it is. If you don't care nothing about history, go on. Shoo, this is not for you. Keep doom scrolling or looking at cat videos, whatever it is you do. Now, for everybody else, today we're gonna talk about how hatred for drummers low-key created hip-hop. Yeah, yeah. That's the title of the video. How hatred for drummers low-key created hip-hop. So we got to go back to the 60s and the 70s, right? So let's say that you wanted to record a song. First and foremost, you would need to write the song, of course. And then next, you would need to get some studio session musicians together, right? So you need to get a bass player, a drummer, a piano player, so forth and so on, right? Now, here's the thing. If we're talking a band, a group like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, so forth and so on, you don't really got to worry about, who's going to play the instruments. However, when we're talking about acts like, the Temptations, the Supremes, or, the Four Tops or something like that, that's only referring to the people who are the vocalists, the people who are singing and dancing. It don't really matter who's playing bass. It don't really matter who's playing drums. As long as they're doing their job, it doesn't really matter, right? Okay, so once we get to the point where you have consistent drum patterns going on, like, for example, Motown, disco, for example, things like that. These record executives, these record producers, they get frustrated at the fact that they got to keep paying a drummer because they feel like the drummers aren't contributing creatively like the bass player, the piano player, the guitar player, whatever. So what do? They get greedy and they start figuring out, how can we cut drummers out of the picture altogether? We only going to pay the drummers when it's time to go on tour, right? Now we got to talk about drum machines a little bit. The actual history of drum machines is actually way more complicated than it seems. The first drum machine actually was built in like the 1920s or 30s or something. It looks wicked. If y'all ever get a second, look up, type in like Rhythmicon 1930s or something. It's this massive machine. It looks like it's steam powered and got wheels and pulleys and all kinds of stuff on it. And so, yeah, that's the first ever drum machine. But for the context of this video, when I say drum machine, I'm speaking on behalf of these pieces of electronic equipment that would, come to be known in the late 70s, early 80s. I'm talking the Roland CR78, the TR-808, TR-909. Now, if you know anything about hip hop, one of those numbers I said should kind of feel a little bit familiar. So when we talk about the early stages of hip hop, you had two options. You could pay a live band to play the same loop for like 10 minutes, which is crazy. That's the rapper's delight way of making hip hop. Or you could do what the early producers in hip hop did, where they would get multiple records and they would sample. You would take the drums from this vinyl, you take the horns from this vinyl, you take the bass from this vinyl, and then you put it all together and you have a song. And then, of course, you get somebody to rap over it. And that would be how you went about producing that. Well, when these drum machines started to come into the mix, the problem was they were garbage. They were hot doo-doo. They sounded like absolute trash. So this first generation of drum machines, they didn't do too well. Nobody was willing to actually make records with them because they sounded so foreign, so electronic, so synthesized that everybody was kind of turning their nose up at them. And so where did they end up? Everywhere. They ended up at your local pawn shop, thrift stores. They ended up, in piles of junk at garage sales. And what this did is it made them accessible to regular poor folk in the ghetto who normally wouldn't be able to afford, recording equipment, right? Now, let's go back to that number, 808. One drum machine in particular, the TR-808, had this one particular sound, which was essentially the synthesized combination of a kick drum and a bass guitar note, okay? And we affectionately know it as the 808, Okay, the 808 drum. It's the most recognizable sound from that TR 808. Now, as time progressed, technology gets a little bit more advanced. Hardware gets a little bit more advanced. We begin to be able to manipulate the pitch of individual sounds. And what this did was it gave folks the ability to pitch that 808 up and down to the point where you could create melodies with it. This became popular on the West Coast, but not nearly as much so as down south. This would give birth to a huge plethora of Southern hip hop, those melodic 808s. And the rest is literally history, y'all. The rest is literally history. Once folks figured out how to pitch those 808s up and down, here we are. So yeah, all of this is a result of corporate greed and not wanting to pay your drummers. Now listen, I understand. I don't be wanting to pay them niggas either. But you got to pay your drummers, y'all. You got to pay your drummers. I didn't say you got to love your drummers. I said you got to pay them. Drummers deserve to have they bills paid just like everybody else. So pay your drummers, y'all. If you don't pay your drummers, you might accidentally give birth to some obscure genre of music where decades later people are still arguing whether or not it's actually music or not. Like, we wouldn't be going through none of this if y'all would have just paid the drummers in the first place. So yeah. What else? October 11th, Soul Carnival at the camp, 7 to 10, free show. Buy some merch, buy a drink, come chill with us, come listen to some music. And yeah, we out of here.